By the time this segment airs, you will have swam through a sewer of a presidential race. I don't buy into all the hyperbole. Frankly, I find it sickening how media drones have felt the need to proclaim that it was the foulest election of all time, or the strangest, or some kind of superlative. All I know for sure is that the Trump and Clinton show lured far too many eyes off of important local stories, including some that may have stemmed from the degenerate tone that one candidate in particular set during the race. Hint, his name rhymes with chump. And our first two segments this month cover a group which that deplorable candidate neglected to engage positively: Muslim Americans. Following said harrowing election, you will be faced with three options: to retreat from current events altogether, to continue eating more of the mainstream garbage you've been fed throughout the cycle, or to pay overdue attention to state, town, and city issues that actually matter. Should you choose the regional route in some way or another, we have you covered. Because while others ignored local stories, while the national races were raging, our team at the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism kept track of pressing local developments. You can find our coverage at bingeonline.org and at digboston.com, among other places. Thankfully, we're not alone in bringing you the stories that other outlets are afraid or reluctant to cover. As viewers of Democracy Now!, which airs on several of the stations that air this show, are well aware, that program's lead anchor, journalist Amy Goodman, had a warrant issued for her arrest in September following her damning coverage of the standoff between corporate authorities aligned with big energy and protesters in North Dakota. The charge was nonsense and abusive. Still, Goodman and her crew stood up to their bullies, in the process catalyzing a significant movement. Because they didn't surrender, the Standing Rock pipeline story finally landed in mainstream newspapers and on the 6 o'clock news. It's just one of many instances in which a major story germinated at the grassroots level, but it's one that we're proud to trumpet on beyond Boston. Just like this upcoming segment from Cambridge Community Television, which is a prime example of how people in our region have stood up to the punks and bullies in the past few months.
So I wanted to ask, how have you felt this manifest itself in Cambridge in any way? And do you feel that this has impacted attitudes towards Muslims in the city?
You might be the authority on the national backlash that's occurred, and then I'd be happy to talk a little bit about Cambridge.
Yeah, well, obviously all politics are local, but even on a national level, we are seeing this very, very broad and disturbing and troubling movement of mainstreaming Islamophobia. If a candidate endorses a white supremacist platform, if a candidate endorses an anti-Semitic platform, they would immediately get shot down. But when you have mainstream political voices that are espousing anti-Muslim sentiments, that enables those who had been on the fringes of these movements to be legitimized and to express them within the mainstream public sphere. This legitimizes all kind of behavior in the public eye that is discriminatory toward Muslims. So in the last few weeks, we've seen truly dozens and even on the order of hundreds of anti-Muslim incidents across the country that rise to the level of deep hate crimes, whether this is a bullet-ridden copy of the Quran left at a mosque or a severed pig's head thrown at a mosque in Philadelphia, Muslim cab drivers being beaten nearly to death, Sikh man in Chicago being beaten nearly to death after being confused for being a Muslim, Muslim mothers pushing strollers in San Diego being assaulted, as happened 3.5 weeks ago. Really, these kind of incidents, unfortunately, are reflective of a larger xenophobia that, again, the best values of our country push to the side, but when they get pushed into the center, become manifestations of this, great problem at the end of the day.
And I don't want to be guilty of Cambridge exceptionalism, where it's exceptional in so many lovely ways, and I think politicians are often guilty of saying, my city right or wrong, but I must say, on this issue, and in fact on many issues, Cambridge leads, again. Cambridge is a place where I think all of us have felt welcome. I have gotten some messages of kind of hate speech and some messages of bigotry. I have no reason to believe that those messages came from Cambridge residents. I have every reason to believe that they came from outside of Cambridge, from people who are in that camp, buoyed by a candidate who espouses the type of fascist bigotry that the world actually hasn't seen on a political stage for some time. But in Cambridge, I think we rise above. I've had nothing personally but an outpouring of support from all angles. That's friends, friends I've lost touch with for years are coming back, and they're saying, we understand and appreciate what what you're going through. This has happened to other communities, Latino community, the Black community, many other communities, and there are people coming out and saying, listen, know that now that it's your turn, it's not just, you know, a passing of the buck from one community to the other. It is an establishment of unity and solidarity amongst and between communities, and that has been very powerful here. And we've heard that from church and synagogue leaders. We've heard that from progressive faith groups. We've heard that from people of conscience and secular humanist groups. So I couldn't say enough about how much Cambridge is rising to support disenfranchised communities.
That's
The
really
fact that
wonderful to
we
hear.
are privileged and blessed to enjoy this kind of social justice-oriented, diversity-oriented community is a wonderful thing. But I also think we shouldn't paint a rosy picture of the situation for Muslims, even here in Cambridge. I think that a city as great as this is not insular. We don't live separate from the reality of the greater realities of this country. For example, a Harvard Muslim woman student the other day was verbally assaulted on the T for allegedly carrying a suspicious-looking bag, and nobody stepped up or spoke up. And to me, you could also say that, oh, they're probably not Cambridge residents. That may be very well true, but she herself is a Cambridge resident, and I think the fact that we're so privileged and educated, it demands us to be exemplars for speaking up about events that are happening in the country. And I think Cambridge is probably one of the most equipped cities in America to be brave and courageous in speaking up against things like that. And just because things are okay and people aren't speaking up, we don't know about the psychological trauma that Muslims might be facing in Cambridge, walking down the street wearing a hijab. We may not be verbally or physically abused, but there are microaggressions that occur on a day-to-day basis with people's assumptions. And, you know, Donald Trump and the GOP were talking about political correctness. I want to flip that term and say we need to have a little political correctness move in a more positive direction, where we're brave enough to ask critical questions about Western American foreign policy towards Muslim countries for the past decades and the industry of Islamophobia. And without having honest, critical conversations like these, we'll continue to perpetuate this, you know, rosy image, even though we're privileged to enjoy. I think because we're privileged, we need to push back a little bit.
Our guest this month is Ann Durso-Rose, the Associate Director at Malden's Media Center at MATV, who covered the first New England Muslim Festival, which attracted more than 3,000 people in September, shattering all expectations. Last year, my team at BINJ discovered that an undercover SWAT team was planted in the crowd for the Dalai Lama's visit to Malden in 2014. With that kind of surveillance on immigrant populations and the general nastiness directed at Muslims in particular by Trump supporters over the past year, we're thrilled that Ann comes to us with this story of hope. And we hope that you can fill us in a little bit more before we watch the clip.
Yeah, well, Malden was chosen to host this festival that was kind of put together, and the people that organized it figured, you know, if they get 500 people, they'd be happy. They never did this before. And Malden, because it has a large Muslim population as well as one of the most diverse populations in the state, was a good, and also a central location, was a good choice for hosting this festival. And there was, as far as I know, there was no other video coverage of the festival. We were there, I was there with 3 other volunteers from MATV. We covered all of the entertainment that was happening on stage, and we did interviews with folks and just got the general feel. I've never seen so many people in Malden Square, like 3,000 people, you know, in this area, and it was amazing. It was like, you know, people out there connecting, and everybody, there was just this thrill in the air that something like this was happening, and there wasn't a problem. And so you'll see more in the clip, but people just swarmed up to us wanting to be interviewed, wanting to talk.
And so, you know, you're a small station, so dedicating 3 people, the editing, I mean, that's like the whole team. That's like, you know, what the Herald sends to the Super Bowl, like their whole squad. Why is it so important that a community television station get involved with this, you know, really show what's going on at the ground level?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as we heard this was happening, we're like, this is a big deal. And so, you know, people were happy to volunteer. And I think the organizers, what ended up happening is we have Neighborhood View, which is our citizen journalism program. We posted it, we put the video out, it got over 1,000 hits, it was shared all over the place. And the organizers were so appreciative. They had us as guests to their volunteer appreciation lunch, and they gave us a plaque. It was so important to them to get this kind of coverage and to get it out there. And you know, that's what media centers do. They cover what's in their neighborhoods, what's in their backyard, and like this one has significance, obviously beyond Malden.
So is it safe to say it was kind of like a long time coming? You know, 3,000 people show up, like finally, and what does that say for moving forward? And how do how does the station plan to be involved?
I think that, you know, first of all, I hope it's not the first, you know, I hope it continues, a tradition that continues, but I think that for these folks who were organizing and coming from all over the place, it was very affirming. It was very affirming to see that many Muslims all in one place that came from all different backgrounds, and many non-Muslims, and being able to share their culture and to be able to be accepted and sort of go beyond, you know, all the sort of stereotypes and stuff that's out there in the news.
So do you feel like even, you know, people know how sizable the Muslim population is here already, but an event like that does bring a lot of people from the non-Muslim community?
Yeah, you know, and I think people don't realize, you know, the Muslims come from all over the world, so many different countries, so many different, you know, gradations of you know, understanding Islam and their practice of Islam, and so I think that it's very visible, you know. I think you see it in the clip, and you certainly see it in the festival.
Excellent. Well, let's check it out.
Thanks, Chris.
Roll clap.
Tell me, what is the purpose of this festival?
It's actually, we are hoping at the end of the day that people, they change the image, that a lot of media, they use it wrong, and I hope that they can get the positive.
This idea came first with everything that is happening after all these terrorism attacks, and people, they do not, you know better about Muslims because they just assume that they're all terrorists. And so we discussed among us, and we're like, we need to do something. We need to show to the people that we are just as human as everyone else. We condemn actually all these attacks, and we feel sad for any misjustice or any you know, terrorism happening either in the name of the religion or by any other name. And we wanted to show to our community that we love so much and that we serve as teachers, as lawyers, as doctors. We want to show them that what we're doing here, we want them to share with us our culture. We want them to know who we are.
They brought it in, told us she's the #1 pick. You got the job, but you got it as an outfit. It's the position that you put me in.
And I also noticed you had on the program doing a selfie with a hijab.
Yeah, so I don't think that's going to be on stage, but on one of our booths, we have try a hijab on, and so a head covering, and then you kind of do a selfie just, you know, as a memory, to add a little spice to it. And yeah, it's kind of the point. So I've had friends in elementary school and middle school that like saw me, for example, wrap it on in the bathroom. They're like, that's it? Like all you have to do is like literally drape the cloth over your head. And so it's kind of just to show you how simple it is. And like, it's not the actual covering. That's just, it's like symbol for many more deeper meanings of modesty and respect and the way we carry ourselves in the public. So yeah.
Come on, it starts to 1 billion strong. 1 billion strong, all year long. Prayers to Allah, even in Hong Kong. Can never be wrong if you read the Quran. Cause it's never been changed since day one. Others may brag, say that we lag, but they don't know all the power we have. The power we have, the power we had. So Muslim, don't you ever feel sad. Take many looks, go read their books. You see all the facts that your friends overlook. So always be proud, you can say it out loud. I'm proud to get down with the Muslim crowd.
I'm really glad this is happening. I'm a peace activist. I work with Massachusetts Peace Action, and I think it's particularly good that this festival is happening right now in this climate of increasing intolerance. You know, I think Islamophobia is at really shocking levels in this country right now, and we have a front runner for president who's made, I mean, to say he's made explicitly Islamophobic statements is an understatement.
Our first time here, and I'm really very happy to see so many people here, and it's wonderful. We thank Malden City and other organizations who have helped sponsored this. This is a great gathering, I must say that.
I would agree that everybody seems so warm and friendly and kind and generous. What do you hope will come from this festival? What do you hope will happen after this festival? Unity.
And the concept of Islamophobia, that has to be taken out. We love this country. We'll sacrifice for this country. I'm not born, but my children are all born in this country. So they are over here. Where I will go? Yeah, somebody has to tell me.
That's the thing. You're all American.
Yes.
And we need each other, right?
Of course.
Hello. Who are you? What's your name? My sister. So you're sisters.
She's new.
She's my latest friend. And if I were to ask you, what does unity mean to you? What would you say?
Unity means you work together, you help each other, you also in a happy time and a bad time.
And how do you think we can use our differences in that unity? How can they play a positive role?
It's respect for each other. You have your thing, I have my thing. You respect me, I respect you. So value each other.
I like that, value each other. And that you can only do by getting to know each other, right? Which we're doing today.
Together.
Don't ever frown with your head looking down. If you read the Quran, you're the best in the town. We all have doubts and we have no clout. But in a few years, see how we've come about. Now back on the scene, the #1 dean. I'm proud to be down with the Muslim League. M-U-S, and I am. Yeah, you can smell it, you can say it. M-U-S, and I am.
Few things are more shameful than how candidates and campaigns pander to older members of our community. Desperate liars that they are, politicians often pitch false promises along the senior circuit, duly knowing that the population votes and that they may not be around to see the polls they back break promises after promises. Our next clip comes from Brookline Interactive Group and shows that seniors are more than just a monolithic and reliable voting bloc.
3 years ago in Brookline, Massachusetts, Goddard House Assisted Living started a farm.
I was listening to NPR one day and talking about chickens being brought in a facility. I just decided, why do we have to pay for someone to bring in the chickens? Why don't we just have the chickens right here?
For its director, John Moniz, the project was a natural.
John was raised on a farm. So the idea of having a farm, a small farm at Goddard House, to him was a piece of cake, or a piece of zucchini, I should say, a tomato. It was such an easy and workable and doable idea.
That's what we're eating. Regina brings them in, the vegetables from the garden. Isn't that wonderful?
His grandmother had Alzheimer's disease, and when his grandmother had Alzheimer's, his grandfather responded by building her a chicken coop and building her a garden so that she could go outdoors, interact with her husband, the chickens, really imbue her life with life. And that's what a farm project is all about. It's about life.
There's been so much change as you grow older. And the things that stay constant are the growing gardens around you.
It's all about engagement. And when you use the outdoors at a community like this, you take ownership of it. It becomes more your home, and you say, this is mine. This is my garden. This is my patio. I'm here, and it's part of life.
And a lot of the vegetables we start from seed, carrots and radishes. I planted beet seeds, and it's really a pleasure to see them coming up gradually, growing every week.
Every Tuesday, residents work with a farmer from Green City Growers to plant, grow, maintain, and harvest a variety of vegetables and herbs. Farmer John Neary has guided residents on how to farm and so much more.
It's not just about picking the veggies and weeding. It's about learning about what's growing. It's about learning our environment, what the agriculture is in our greater Boston area. So it's really creating a local urban farm experience that's educational as well as experiential.
I'll pick some of them and dry it actually. And you can have it for tea.
In the Netherlands, there is an extraordinary movement of farm care communities. And these are programs for people who have Alzheimer's, elderly people, people with autism, people with all types of developmental delays, where they actually live on a working farm community and participate in the working farm. The Netherlands has well over 200 therapeutic farm communities alone. So they're a small country. They're way ahead of us.
We have planted radishes and lettuce.
Wanting to build on the farm's success, Goddard House initiated an intergenerational program.
Yeah, this is the Lincoln sign, and at the back of the sign it says all our names.
It partnered residents of the Olmsted Memory Support Unit with students from Brookline's Lincoln School.
Their kids have been just really gentle and understanding, and the residents have just showered them with love and attention, and just, they couldn't have been kinder.
Oh, I think it's wonderful. I mean, I love seeing them do it and being so excited about the flowers and what they're doing.
These are marigolds, these are basil.
And it really does, put a smile on both the child and the resident.
I get this big boost of happiness.
The farming initiative just keeps growing.
This garden is like a fantasy land. It's therapeutic.
Not wanting to let winter interfere with the joy of growing things, Goddard House has created an indoor garden with 24/7 sun lamps and a thriving collection of bok choy, mint, lettuce, cilantro, parsley, and chard. The project also developed a storytelling component where residents and staff share their farm and gardening stories and post them as art for all to see.
You need to find uses for it because when the crop comes in, you get loads of them,
Today, Goddard House residents are living the farm-to-table movement.
Holy cow. I know, that's zucchini for days.
With 400 eggs harvested this year and 250 pounds of vegetables, Goddard House residents reap what they sow. And with the culinary art of Chef Nick Polinsky, they eat it too.
It's delicious.
The farm at Goddard House. It's about growing vegetables, growing knowledge, growing connection, and growing well-being.
And that comes the spring, they're going to be such and such. Comes the fall, they're going to be such and such. And there's something reliable about that. The way of life and the way it goes on.
You come out here and it's just like, it's life, it's just life, and you just feel so alive when you come out here.
And according to Ginny Mazer, growing a farm is accessible for you too.
We want to let people know that this is something that's very doable, and that if you're a school or a not-for-profit organization with staff, or if you're an elder care community like us, building a farm, growing a farm is easy to do. The beauty of it is you can do it step by step, add garden beds one at a time, add a chicken coop, add beehives. We also found that there was quite a bit of funding out there through foundations and through grants that we were able to get. So we're happy to talk with anyone who might be interested in growing their own farm here in Brookline or elsewhere.
With that, let's bring it home with some passionate parting words from BINJ Network Director Jason Pramas, followed by a performance by Shalita Burke that was filmed right here at Malden Media Center before she climbed to the top of the charts on MTV.com. Until then, I'll see you beyond Boston.
In contemporary Massachusetts, we don't typically have as many open attacks on immigrants and refugees as some other states one could name. But we all know that anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, and lately anti-Muslim sentiments are always among us. Just a quick glance towards Central Mass shows the scale of the problem, lurking beneath the surface of polite discourse like a toxic iceberg. Because in the town of Dudley, a recent effort by the Islamic Society of Greater Worcester to purchase a 55-acre abandoned farm to use as a cemetery for its co-religionists has been stopped cold by local officials fielding a series of excuses that make it clear that deep-seated prejudice is actually at the heart of their protests. Now, it's understandable, if misguided, that some Americans might feel threatened by more people arriving to our shores as immigrants and refugees every year, giving ongoing economic instability. And it's legitimate to express reasoned critiques of Islam, or indeed any religion in our democratic society, although it's more typical to hear illogical and paranoid ones. But before the anxiety and the critiques, it's imperative for citizens to remember a couple of important facts. First, unless you're a Native American, and I mean basically full-blood Native American, Hawaiian, or Alaskan, or an African American whose ancestors were enslaved and dragged here in chains, then your family crashed a country that used to belong to someone else. The United States was stolen from those original inhabitants by a combination of pandemic disease, broken treaties, forced removal, and outright genocide. So the idea that you have some inviolable moral or legal claim to this land is laughable. Second, unless you're a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, a WASP, whose ancestors arrived here prior to the American Revolution, then your family was once a bunch of immigrants or refugees who were considered just as suspect and dangerous as far too many immigrants and refugees, especially Muslims, are considered by far too many Americans today. And since those old-line WASPs controlled politics in the U.S. well into the 20th century, guess what some of them did from time to time? They banned or attempted to ban immigration from most nations on the planet, and also led vicious riots against many people that did not fit into their narrow vision for this land of opportunity. Sadly, they were eventually joined in that series of unfortunate crusades by members of other ethnic groups who had gradually managed to establish themselves as American over time. By way of example, let's take a look at my family. We're Greek. Both my mother's and father's sides came over here a century ago. Now today, when people think about Greek Americans, media stars like Maria Menounos and Zach Galifianakis pop to mind. The associations are generally positive, and no one would ever think to question our credentials as good Americans. But in my grandparents' day, in many parts of the U.S., Greeks were literally compared to vermin and contagious diseases. Newspapers of the time talked about our strange ways and inherent criminality, and said we would never fit in with Anglo-Saxon civilization. They called for our expulsion and worse. Greeks were the victims of nativist riots that drove us out of cities like South Omaha, Nebraska on more than one occasion. Yet despite all that, today I have relatives that would be more than happy to let Donald Trump ban all Muslims from entering the U.S. Sound familiar? If not, then you need to take a closer look at your family history. And after you've done that, you need to do your level best to stop yourself from tarring entire nationalities and religious groups, especially people fleeing wars and tyranny, at least partially caused by American foreign policy, with the broad brush of the bigot. Every society in history has had its share of zealots, criminals, and terrorists, including ours. So the mere fact of their presence in any group of immigrants or refugees doesn't negate that group's humanity. If you don't want to turn into one of those big bads yourself in defense of an American purity that never existed, then you need to treat everyone seeking shelter on our shores as a human being worthy of basic respect and afford them a chance to become a part of our messy yet still vital democratic experiment. For Beyond Boston, I'm Jason Pramas.